Hey guys, KotM here with the second Ultimate Kaiju Binge vlog. Before I get into the movies, I want to quickly recommend a great piece I found discussing the Japanese version of Half Human, and going into greater depth on the whole Burakumin issue and Toho's moratorium on the film's release on home video. It also links at the end to a more informal review of the English version. I'll leave the link in the description. First up is Godzilla King of the Monsters. Now, I've made the observation before that the alterations to the original film in this version include restructuring it into a kind of a film noir, with Raymond Burr's reporter Steve Martin taking the place of a detective getting to the bottom of a case, the ruins of Tokyo serving as the dead body floating in the swimming pool, and Venetian blind shadows and everything. Now, I've seen this movie countless times in both versions, but on this particular viewing, I was struck by the intensity of the opening. The first shot of the film proper pans across a vast expanse of smoking rubble as Raymond Burr bluntly informs us, "This is Tokyo." We're then dropped into an emergency hospital filled with dead and injured people, with doctors confirming with Geiger counters that children have been severely and probably fatally irradiated. Emiko wonders aloud to Steve what brought this disaster upon them, and it occurred to me fully for the first time in a while that we haven't seen what the hell happened. We see the horror left in Godzilla's wake long before we actually catch a glimpse of him, and it creates a powerful sense of doom that hangs over the flashback sequences of Martin investigating the crisis in progress. Something that also stuck out to me, having just earlier in the day read about the abhorrent localization of Half Human for its American release, was that for all the flack it takes for cutting some of the explicit references to World War II and being an Orientalist bastardization of the original masterpiece, it honestly struck me this time around as pretty respectful to the source material. Films like Half Human and Varan were basically regarded as stock footage around which to base an American production. Godzilla Raids Again would have met the same fate had ABPT finished The Volcano Monsters. But Godzilla King of the Monsters seems to take the approach of using the American-produced material to bring the original film to an American audience. Think about it. Varan's US version replaces the original leads with an American officer, relegating his predecessors to supporting roles under new names. Half Human plays the Japanese footage silent, with narration by a new character played by John Carradine, in which none of the Japanese characters are named. Half Human also almost completely excludes the Japanese cast and crew from the opening credits, putting them at the end after this weird, vaguely condescending title card. Varan makes no mention of them at all. Both replace most or all of the original Japanese music scores. King of the Monsters, on the other hand, still keeps the original characters in the foreground, with their character arcs and relationships mostly intact. Akira Ifukube's original music is preserved and even used to score new scenes, such as Steve Martin waking up in what's left of the building from which he watched Godzilla's rampage. The Japanese cast and crew are credited alongside their American counterparts at the end of the film. It's true that King of the Monsters cheats here and there, such as repurposing undubbed Japanese scenes by having an interpreter tell Steve they're talking about something completely different, but at the same time, the Japanese lines in the new scenes are not random Japanese or Japanese-sounding nonsense, but actual Japanese dialogue, albeit sometimes butchered in their delivery by actors of a range of Asian American backgrounds. The adaptation is respectful of both the Japanese filmmakers and its characters, with the extent of the culture clash humor being Serizawa joking about Steve's poor Japanese. Next up, there's Rodan. I hadn't sat through this particular film in a while, and I remember finding it, like Godzilla Raids Again, a bit dull. I liked it better this time. It is definitely a slow burn, and what was interesting to me this time was the constant gradual escalation of the stakes throughout the film. First, there's some flooding in a coal mine in Kyushu. Then a miner turns up dead in the water, sparking rampant speculation about his murder by another man he'd quarreled with. Then the real culprit, a giant insect, appears. Then more appear, and the mine caves in, trapping the lead in the tunnel. Then an earthquake opens a massive crater, and the lead reappears, first stricken with amnesia, then remembering Rodan hatching from an egg and eating the giant insects. Then Rodan emerges, having been responsible for numerous plane crashes and mysterious attacks on people and livestock, and attacks Fukuoka. Then another Rodan joins in the attack. It plays up a similar, kind of gradually unfolding mystery to the original Godzilla, and features some spectacular scenes of destruction by wind, making it a great choice for the first kaiju film in color. The Mysterians is where Toho's Tokusatsu Productions made the jump to widescreen, and visually it's very strong, but this is a movie that has never been able to sustain my interest all that well. It's a little more interesting keeping the commentary from the piece I mentioned before in mind, but that only highlights how seriously misplaced the film's focus is. Shiraishi seems to be the only character with any significant internal conflict, and he's a hell of a lot more interesting than Kenji Sahara's character, but he's relegated to a supporting role. I also realize that it's a bit of a stretch to call this a kaiju film, since the closest thing to a monster in it is the robot Mogura, but it appears in a Godzilla film down the road, so I'm counting it. Also, just as a side note, there's an amusing letter on the Internet Archive that some guy wrote to J. Edgar Hoover after taking his kids to this film, expressing concern over its argument that the US and the Soviet Union should put aside their differences and work together for the benefit of humanity. The horror. I'll put the link to that in the description too. Next up, there's Varan. This one's sort of interesting to consider in light of the issues surrounding Half Human, but otherwise not a terribly impressive or thought-provoking film. You've got another depiction of a backwater village worshipping the monster, but it's not nearly as unflattering as Half Human, which may explain how this film managed to avoid harsher self-censorship than the apparent deletion of a line where a professor describes the area as the Tibet of Japan. I guess maybe it also helps that they were right about there being a dangerous monster, and the highfalutin city slickers from the university who told them it was all a ridiculous superstition were wrong. Also, the priest goes out like kind of a badass, praying desperately for forgiveness for the leads as Varan bears down on him. But yeah, overall, as a movie, it's not all that impressive. It was originally meant for television, hence the return to black and white, but then Toho decided mid-stride to release it theatrically, cropping the footage already shot to what they called Toho Panscope, which I've seen theorized to be a compromise ratio of 2:1. The action is scaled back for this one, with mixed results. Some of the mid-movie action is interesting, but the finale at Haneda Airport is underwhelming. This is also the first kaiju film to augment its special effects sequences with footage from previous films, in this case the first two Godzilla films. Varan is an interesting looking monster, and it's a shame he never returned in more than a cameo, but he doesn't exactly have a real classic to his own name either. And finally there's Konga, which was a British-American co-production that I included partially for its obvious connection to King Kong, and partially for the actor-in-a-suit approach to Konga itself. Honestly, the main draw with this film is watching Michael Gough, yes, Alfred, from the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher Batman movies, fully commit to an asinine script as the mad scientist who grows a chimpanzee to giant size and uses it to kill his rivals. The cast in general do an admirable and dignified job with the material. The only really bad performance is from the dedicated young student who's implausibly oblivious to Michael Gough's dirty old man fixation on her. It's also sort of amusing seeing these with-it, fun-loving British college kids of a pre-Beatles era. The scene when Konga finally grows kaiju-sized is kind of a letdown though. He destroys the scientist's lab and greenhouse, picks him up, and then wanders around not doing much of anything, except grabbing at passers-by to no effect. He even stands in front of Big Ben for a good few minutes before the military finally brings him down, and he never destroys it. Fortunately though, this wouldn't be the UK's last attempt at a giant monster film, and the next one would more than make up for this one. We'll look at that one next time, plus Denmark's contribution to the genre, as well as Mothra, Gorath, and King Kong vs. Godzilla. For now though, thanks for watching, special thanks to Exploder Button, check out my Patreon, and I'll see you next time.